Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marginal Support, where support is anything but marginal. I am your host, Andre Lindy, and I am excited to have a fellow podcaster, a fellow person in the sport world, and Weaver, on today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Even though I have been podcasting now for, I don't know, 6 months or so, this is the first podcast I've guested on. So maybe I need to get out there more.
I think that's kind of interesting. It was for me. It was the exact opposite. I went on I think it was Rebecca's Next Hire podcast, and then Thibodeau, he does his one, and then he was the one kind of drove me to it. So I'm happy that you can be a guest here because we all want to share information, we all want to be connected. So it's great to have you on. So when we were talking previously, saying okay, what do we want to talk to you suggested one topic that you say you're quite passionate about, and I think is also super interesting. But I'm not going to steal your thunder. So, what was that topic that you wanted to talk about, and why are you so excited about it?
Yeah, sure. So QA, support QA, which is different than engineering QA, where, we have a product and we run it through a team who makes sure that the bugs are all worked out. I mean, it's similar. We have customer conversations and we're making sure that all the bugs are worked out with those. And that could be anything from an automated system or just your manager goes through once in a while and looks at conversations and highlights things that are of note. And I've been interviewing a lot of people about QA now because that's what I'm at Tetra. I'm the head of customer engagement, and our tool that we're working hard on right now is called Support Man, and it's a QA tool. So that's why my focus is in that direction. But I've been doing this, working on QA since I was a support specialist and helped launch the QA program at my previous company, YNAB. So it's something I've done for a while. I've been really interested in. Actually, the very first time I worked on a QA program, I did a video internally for the team and made a little metaphor about having spinach in your teeth and made a little video where I had spinach in my teeth. And just like, wouldn't you want someone to tell you if you had spinach in your teeth? It's not punitive, it's not tied to your compensation. It's just, we're here to help you be the best that you can be.
I think that's great. So I'm curious, how often do you think people in the support world have actually done QA but don't realize they're doing QA until someone points it out to them?
That's a great question. I think often, I think there are a lot of teams who don't do an official QA program at all and maybe feel like they should, sort of like, I know I need to like upgrade my AC in my house, but I just keep putting it off. I think QA tends to be that kind of a thing. And so in that scenario, and if that's you, you're not alone. Um, there are things people are doing that are QA that they aren't necessarily thinking of as an official program. Even if that's just, I'm your team lead or I'm your manager and we have our one-on-one and I say, hey, how did the conversations go this week? Maybe we're not even looking at individual conversations, but we're talking about your general sense. That's a kind of QA in itself.
Interesting. Now that you mentioned that, I think I kind of did that in a previous role where on a weekly basis I would go through tickets of my team members and to scan it to see the quality responses I was seeing in there. Was there anything that was sticking out as red flags? Was there something where I wanted to say, you did a great job on this, I want to see you doing more of that? Uh, is that the kind of QA you're talking about in essence, where you're checking the quality of work of the people that you're working with, and then you're trying to spotlight that maybe as either something they've done well or something that they can improve on?
Yeah, absolutely. So a great manager is always going through their, whether it's support or anywhere, going through their reports work and looking for ways to highlight how they're good at what they're doing and not waiting for an annual review to give some constructive criticism. And so if you're doing that and you work in support, well, the people you work with are 80, 90% working with customers. So that's what you're, excuse me, that's what you're looking at is their work with customers.
So, what when we talk about QA and you were talking about this process, what are some areas do you feel that people have blind spots to right now where you think that they could really improve on that they even don't even know it's a blind spot? Hence the term blind spot.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't take credit for this because I've been on this mission to learn from QA teams. Um, And hopefully I'll have some of these folks on my podcast and we'll talk through these in more detail. But what I've learned is QA is not just for coaching. So that's how we typically think about it. I'm doing QA as a customer support manager to make my team better at what they do. So if I have a team member who's doing 100 conversations a day and they're making typos in most of those conversations, I'm going to coach them so they're not making typos anymore. That's sort of what we typically think of. But I think the blind spot is your QA, well, your customer conversations, which you're immersed in when you're doing that QA, are an absolute just gold mine for product information, for marketing information. So if I have a specialist who has really hit on a great, wording, a great sentence to describe a part of your product, that needs to get sent over to marketing to so that they can replicate that and learn from how well that works when talking to customers. Or if I have a specialist who's really confused about a part of the product and keeps making mistakes on that part when customers reach out, well, the customer's confused about it because they're reaching out. The specialist is confused about it because they're struggling with it. Maybe that's something that needs to be fixed in the UI or in the product, and that information needs to go to the product team. That all can come from your QA program.
I mean, what it sounds like you're talking about there is in some ways predictive QA, and
Mm.
so it's you're getting suggestions before you even know they're suggestions. So, what are your thoughts on how? I mean, since we're in the age of AI right now, what's your thoughts on how AI could basically help with this QA process and go through your wealth material to try to find some of these insights for you?
That's a really great question. And at SupportMan, we have an AI tool, and what it does is it uses a rubric to evaluate the conversation. So you can go in and kind of like if I want to write an article and I need a jump start, I might ask AI, what's a good outline for this article, or what are some topics that are interesting, and then I go on and write it from there. Our tool has a baseline of here's what you might want to think about with this QA, and then I can jump off from there and have a conversation with the specialist. I think that's one great way. I think there are tools that folks are building now that will automate some of that, like I was talking about sending to marketing and sending to product, so that it's, if you have thousands of conversations every week, you're not going to be able to look at every single one. That's where AI is really useful, is in identifying patterns and aggregating information. So you can say, hey, a large number of customers reached out about whatever this week, a hot topic, and maybe that's a spike. Maybe we need to look into a bug. I think that's where AI will be really useful.
So one area that I see AI, it's great, is that it can summarize all this data for you, but it also is prone to mistakes. What's your feeling that if you go through this and it's very persistent that this is something that needs to be brought to your attention, but then you know that this is a feature, not a bug, popular saying in the support world. Um, how do you go about that where you're getting lots of feedback that this is not right? How do you go back and looking at the queue and saying, I don't think the QA information right here is right? How do you adjust for that?
I think this is regardless of whether you're using AI or not. I have an upcoming podcast episode with Alex Plaskett, who's an amazing support manager. And he talks about if, as you're doing your QA, if something, say your CSAT is 85% and you really want to get it up to 95%, but that extra 10% is really customers they're not unhappy about the service they've gotten. They're unhappy about this one feature or this one bug or something in the product. So as you're reporting, you can maybe mask out those numbers, but more importantly, you can just say, hey, here's this number. It's 85. We want it to be 95, but consider here's the, 10% that aren't really reflecting on us. I think it's the same thing with AI. We can't just let it go and, you know, pish posh, we're done. There's always got to be context around the story that your data is telling.
I think that's absolutely true. You always need that like human touch, that person that's going in there and looking at the data. Um, since you and I both come from experience when there was no AI and nothing of that sense, and we had to do all the hard work ourselves. How do you feel that having that perspective has helped you both with QA and how you interact with AI? That we pretty much had to do all the work ourselves in the past. That now we can spot the difference between this is what AI can give us and here's what AI can't give us.
I think we all have to be vigilant. I don't know whether it's true or not, but there's a lot that's been said about how basically AI is going to rot our brains, and that was said about video games. That was said about books when books became popular. I think all technologies, we fear that it's going to take away our abilities because we're offloading that that cognitive effort to something else. But I do think we have to be vigilant. Like before AI, I noticed that because of social media and TikTok, I wasn't really reading whole books anymore. And so I got really vigilant about limiting the amount of time I spent with short, dopamine hits of videos and short text and really spending time relearning to read long form. And I think that's kind of what we need to make sure we're preventing with AI. It's easy to, like, I write a newsletter every week, and it would be easy to just say, okay, AI, write this newsletter for me. It would be a crappier newsletter, and I wouldn't be learning from it and iterating on it. I think we need to. So there's this idea of, where was I reading about this? Oh, Bob Dotto is a thought leader and a philosopher, and he was writing in this book I'm reading about U friction. So EUFRI friction, which is good friction. So a lot of AI tools propose to take away the friction for us, but we need to be careful about the friction that we keep. Like when I plan my day, I really don't want AI to plan my day for me because I need to be thinking about those things. I need to be thinking, oh, I'm going to meet with Andre later today. We're going to talk about the podcast and like putting that in my brain so it churns. AI can't do that for me. And I think we're just at the beginning of understanding which things we need to keep for ourselves and which things we need to offload.
I think that's an amazing point about there. I mean, we have to be really selective about that. But I mean, the point you're talking about, good friction, I mean, I can't agree more with that. I mean, just in terms of when you look back at past experiences where we maybe failed or areas that we have found super interesting and we want to scratch that itch more, we're not going to have that opportunity to find that itch if we're not allowing stuff to rub against us and get that exposure in terms of what we need. Another thing that you talked about, and I've experienced myself also, was the basically coming more TLDR, which I think is a huge issue. And so that's also why I try to read more books, I listen to podcasts and whatnot. What are things that you have actively done? Because you said you realize, but what are things that you've actively done or can suggest others that makes so they don't get into that rut of the TLDR?
I mean, I feel like I've become pretty radical. So I certainly don't want to judge anybody for not doing what I'm doing, but I'll just share my flow. I deleted my Facebook account because for a couple of years I kept trying to, and I'm a millennial. Facebook was my social media of choice. I kept trying to just, I'll only look on my computer. I'll only look on Fridays, and I just found it kept creeping back in. Um, and I stopped using TikTok. I stopped using really any social media except LinkedIn, which is my job at this point. And I've spoken about this a lot in the support driven community, I don't use the algorithms for anything. So for LinkedIn, for example, never, like, I cannot stress this enough, never just go to LinkedIn and scroll through the feed. I don't get anything good, and it's mind numbing. What I do instead is I have a set of bookmarks that I open up all these bookmarks, and it's you, your posts, other people's posts, people that I actually want to follow. And what I've found is of these dozens that I go through, I would never get this stuff in my feed. And then I can engage more thoughtfully on those instead of just being reactive. Two, I started actually reading books and putting my phone away. So my phone goes on its cradle in the other room, and I start my day with, even if it's just a page while I'm drinking coffee, I eventually get through a book. And uh, that was the primary way that I started. It took a while. I would get through a paragraph and I would go, oh, I need to remember to do this thing, or I just need to check something, and eventually it fades.
It's really interesting. I mean, that kind of reminds me of a post that Andrew Rios, or as a lot of us call him, Coach Rios, put up that said, "Start your day by not looking at your phone. Take a walk, read a book." And I can't agree more. It just makes your brain feel refreshed in some ways. I love what you talk about putting your phone off the side and reading a book. I mean, also, it there's a certain sensation when you just have the paper in hand and you're flipping through the pages. I mean, personally, I love that. I've tried e-readers. I just can't do them for some reason.
Me
Maybe
too.
it's because I
Same.
am a zennial. I just like the book feel itself. So these are great. What kind of books do you say you tend more to now these days? Are you more of a fiction or nonfiction person?
Both. I tend to read nonfiction first thing in the morning when I get up, and I tend to read fiction to either fall asleep or like I grabbed a novel to take on the plane tomorrow when I'm going out of town. I read fiction to kind of rest and enjoy myself. And but I read more nonfiction. And right now I'm on a whole kick, as you probably aren't surprised by, of digital minimalism, and I'm really into maybe an obscure uh, part of the knowledge information world called the Zettelkasten, which is a method of using index cards to take notes on books and then make connections between those. So I'm reading, that's what Bob Dotto's book is about. And I'm reading I'm kind of have gone through a whole series of books about how bad technology is for you, which, you know, that's what I'm doing right now. But I have a degree in philosophy. That's what my bachelor's was in. So of course I'm in customer support, right? Because of my degree in philosophy. So over here I have a bunch of old philosophy books that I go through from time to time and find new ones.
I think that's it's interesting you talk about, you know, the degree you chose and the field you're in. And I couldn't agree more because I am a broadcast journalism major that ended up in support. But I think, you know, if you think about your degree and my degree, there are some similarities that it requires a set of critical thinking. It requires you to look at something from a different perspective
Hmm.
to understand how, you know, you're not just if you're doing something else, like let's say marketing, usually focus on marketing. If you are these other things, you know, you're focused on that. But for people that came into this world, I think we came into this world because just our thought processes and how we think. So, what is something that you would say that you've truly enjoyed that surprised you about support or or you know the CS world that comes from your background from a philosophy side?
That is a really good question. I mean, a couple of things come to mind. One of them is kind of the ability to listen to the issues that are underneath the customer issues. So customers will reach out and what, especially when I worked at YNAB, would be upset about um, the that we moved a button or something. I can't remember a specific example, um, but being able to ask what is your real problem here? Like what's underneath this? Why this change bothers you so much? And then I think that really helped me to work with product. So one thing I learned early on as a support person working with product teams is product teams don't want to know what the customer's proposed solution is. Like, hey, I want you to move this button back. Product teams want to know well, what's the job to be done there, and what's the problem? So I think being able to think about the difference between a problem and a solution, or the difference between a surface issue and an underlying issue, made it easier for me to think through that as a customer support specialist. And two, I think there's a certain way of thinking about the world when you're not like a, not that I'm an academic, but when you're a philosopher, that I was really surprised that for me as a support specialist, as a frontline specialist, it was so easy and even satisfying for me to work with the really angry customers
Hmm.
because I could just think, oh, I could just break this down right into, well, here are the components of what's happening to you, and you're throwing an adult tantrum, and I understand that, but here are the boundaries of what we're going to do to move you forward. And I found that really satisfying.
It's almost the de-escalation, if you will, right? I had an old colleague. He gave the example of Mount Anger, and how it relates. So I don't know if you've ever heard of this analogy. Let's say a person is getting ready for work. They spill coffee on their tie, so they get upset. On their way to work for a big meeting, they have a flat tire. So then they're even more upset. They get to work, their computer won't load, so they can't do their presentation. So then they come at human support, and they are just a rage built up, pent up. They're basically their anger's at the top of the mountain, and they're not angry at you. That they're everything is built up to it. And so people that have been successful in this field, in my opinion, are people that can recognize that someone is angry and upset, but it's not directed at them. But then you can take the steps to be their guide, to lead them down the mountain, so they can release that anger and then maybe feel happy at the end. I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about in that example right there?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes people never de-escalate, and you just have to, ultimately, sometimes there are people that you have to fire as a customer, which is not always, which is ultimately a good thing in some situations. You have to be able to decide whether to do that. But I think that really gets me excited, that idea of someone's whole life can be represented in their chat into a customer support person, right? And I think both as a frontline specialist and as a manager, especially like with what you said before about how our degree or maybe our passion before we got into support was not customer support or customer experience. I don't think anybody grows up, and it goes even goes to college and is like, I want to be a customer support person. And so I think sometimes I've seen people in the support world get discouraged. Like, I'm not really following my passion. I'm not really changing the world. I'm not really doing anything impactful. But it is impactful when somebody climbs that Mount Anger. Is that what you said? Yeah. And then they have a moment with another human being that helps them climb back down that mountain. Or as a support team manager, I mean, I'm sure you also have had managers you will remember for the rest of your life because they were either terrible or made a huge difference positively in your life. And I think that's where we forget sometimes the huge impact we have on other human beings. We spend so much of our time working that that's a huge impact to be a support manager. I get really passionate about helping people to remember that what they do is important.
I, I couldn't agree more, and that's what keeps me going back. So it's a passion. It's a job. No one, like, I've heard a lot of people say people don't get into support to be rich. It's true. We don't get paid the best, but we do it because we love it. So we are coming up on our time, Jim. But it was an absolute pleasure. Something that I think based off our conversation and based off everything I said, I think the way I like to end an episode, and I think it's very apropos to what we talked about, is when I say that support just isn't a job, it's a mindset. And it is a mindset that we want to help others, we want to make others people successful. Thank you very much. Any closing remarks on your end?
No, you're a fantastic interviewer. I want to go on more podcasts so I can talk about myself more because I typically am highlighting my guests. So this has been super fun.
Thanks for coming, and keep in touch, Jen.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.